Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette. This is Philosophy Roulette 204, where I read and review philosophy online. And I just did another paper. It was on some epistemology, so let's do something different. Now we got some Hypatia. Take a look at that. Marketing semiotics. I just did semiotics right before the epistemology paper, so no semiotics. Make my head explode again. Let's see. General clinical practice. No. Philosophy of education. Let's see. History of biology. Value inquiry. We've got a bunch of ethics papers. Mathematical logic. Quarterly. No. In languages I can't read, unfortunately. Multiversum. Philosophical almanac. And it's in Cyrillic. I was like, that could have been cool. I have no idea what a philosophical almanac is, but it's in languages I don't read. Oh, shucks. Nanoethics. What does that even mean? Like very small ethics? Alright, let's take a look at Hypatia anyway. Let's go look at what's forthcoming. I wouldn't mind some feminist philosophy. I haven't read feminist philosophy in a few weeks. So let's see what we got. Review, no thank you. Oh, that's the only one on this page. So let's see what's on this one. Let's go back. Okay, plenty of things to look at. Letter writing is a decolonial feminist practice for philosophical writing. Alright, so that could be interesting, seeing how letter writing, that's 13 pages. Ooh, I like this one. It's 6 less than, this is only 5 pages. Rethinking Decolonial and Postcolonial Knowledges Beyond Regions to Imagine Transnational Solidarity. Let's see if that's available. Privileged Ignorance, World Traveling, and Epistemic Tourism. Hey, more epistemology, but I like the idea of tourism. I could use a vacation. Let's see. Let's see if these are opaque memories. Interesting. Is this available? Why are you not available, papers? Oh. On academia. Thank you. Okay, so is this in like a book or something? Cambridge University Press. Alright, 6 pages. Oh, I like that. Might have to read that one, even though it's very small font and very wide block. Alright, so let's see if this one's available. Nope. Human haunted forgettings and opaque memories. People like the idea. I mean, it is October. We should do the hauntings. I mean, oh no, but it's 15 pages. Alright. 6 pages wins over 15 pages. So that's what we're going to do. And I just want to see what nanoethics is. Let's take a look. I mean, is it like ethics is like only like very small? How is it very small? Is it maybe it's are all the papers shorter than they are in ethics? Or is it about very small things? Synthetic biology, noise and synthetic biology. Oh, it's ethics. It is actually ethics of nanomaterials. Oh my god. Okay. So we're really talking about like very small things. The ethics to do with very small things. I didn't actually believe it was going to be ethics of like small objects, but we're talking about graphene and we're talking about like diseases. Okay. That's kind of fun. I had no idea there'd be an ethics journal on just very small things. But hey, why not? Small things are dangerous things too, and deserve ethical consideration. Let's see. Which one was it? This is coming to term. No, not that one. This one. Okay, cool. Let's get the link loaded up. If you are joining me live, then you can grab the link right there. And if you're late, you can always, well, not late, you just don't come right when the link is in the chat. You can type !paper and the link will pop back up. So, here we go. Rethinking Decolonial and Postcolonial Knowledges Beyond Regions to Imagine Transnational Solidarity by Kiran and Priti Ramamurthy. And I apologize for how I say all non-very boring names. Not even boring, just non-obvious names. To idiots like me. Anywho. Okay, since the early 20th century, various strands of anti-colonial scholarship have been and are concerned with how colonial encounters and practices constitute differences. In recent years, this scholarship maps the uneven implications of coloniality for subjects and bodies marked as different, for example, feminine, race, queer, or trans. Along with feminism, anti-colonial scholarship's analytical goals to link the body with body politics are closely tied to its political ones, to correct the wrongs of colonial encounters and practices. The current avatars of anti-colonial scholarship include postcolonial, decolonial, and settler colonial variants. Postcolonial and decolonial scholarship and the feminisms associated with them are marked by diverse genealogies and histories and emerge from multiple locations. None of them can be spoken of in the singular. What they have in common is that they are anti-colonial in at least two ways. They foreground how race-engendered colonial practices constitute Eurocentric forms of knowledge production, which marginalize other forms of not knowing and being in the world. Second, they concur that the political task of working towards liberation, decolonialization, and social justice must accompany scholarly and academic tasks of analysis. Despite their differences, then, both approaches have long informed and animated feminist scholarship and activism, though often not at once nor in the same spaces. They have much to offer and learn from each other. However, the possibilities for such exchanges are often foreclosed by the problematic assumptions about decolonial and postcolonial feminisms, which are hard to discuss. In this musing, we risk discussing them because we believe it is important to shake them. Well, thanks for stopping by Buppa Bloop. If you have anything to say, please go for it. Otherwise, enjoy your workout. Our reflections emerged from a series of roundtables on this theme, beginning with one at the 2016 annual meeting of the National Women's Studies Association, NWSA, where the co-authors first met. The roundtable, organized by the journal Feminist Studies, was in keeping with the meeting's theme, decoloniality, and its purpose was to stage a dialogue between decolonial and postcolonial feminisms. However, this important dialogue was stymied by several assumptions about postcolonial and decolonial feminisms that emerged in the presentations and in the Q&A following them. These assumptions were at play at other events, which suggest that they are symptomatic of larger trends in the U.S. Academy. We offer our remarks in the hopes of disrupting these problematic trends and fostering transnational solidarity by rethinking what we heuristically call anti-colonial feminisms. The seemingly unshakable ground of regions, frames, and stifles decolonial, postcolonial debates. At the 2016, I'm trying to remember how this goes. I think I've read something either very similar to this or, let's see, let me just see very quickly. Yeah, I read something very similar to this. I wonder why. Okay. This seems like a few different things are. I read another paper that, I have read the same paper twice in this series. I don't think I read this one already, but it's just sort of interesting that I've read a different paper on the same topic. I think because I remember seeing people talk about these panels where people got into arguments about what they should be doing. Maybe that's what happened. Okay. At the 2016 NWSA panel, this was evident in how South Asia was produced in multiple registers. Post-colonial feminism was firmly placed in South Asia and critiqued as an intellectual formation of Anglo-European elite theorizing. Post-colonial feminism was assumed to and accused of continuing to enact colonial epistemologies and could not claim, for example, use of women of color approaches in its intellectual genealogy. Interesting. South Asia was also starkly embedded in the scholars who were presenting, regardless of whether our research was located, where our research was located, the topics we engaged with, or how we took up decolonial, post-colonial feminisms. In fact, each of the three panel presentations by the South Asians embodied as such was about how feminist research could be decolonizing in practice. Banu Subramanian did so in feminist science studies by tracking colonial notions of science and race in genetically profiling Indians and Indians. I don't see the difference there. Based on the collaborative research, Subramanian discussed new attempts at full genetic mappings of South Asian diasporic communities in the U.S. and in indigenous communities in Puerto Rico. Her presentation problematized these mappings, noting that the focus on specifically these communities was because access to Native American and indigenous groups in the U.S. is more fraught than in the communities she discussed. Kiran Asher juxtaposed reading of Gayatri Spivak's work, commonly read as Postcolonial, and that of Sylvia Rivera Cusicanqui, commonly read as Decolonial. She highlighted how both scholars flagged the dilemmas of representing third world, subaltern, and indigenous women and locate these attempts at representation by Western and diasporic scholars within the political economy of knowledge production and international development. Priti Ramamurthy shared two instances, one to highlight the importance of race in India for understanding how the anti-colonial movement erased the memory of mixed-race female movie stars to construct a hegemonic nationalism in the 1930s, and the second stories of workers in informal rural and urban economies that defy preconceived notions of victimhood by claiming subaltern dignity through everyday practices of modern comportment and personal commodity consumption. In short, all three presentations set up a dialogue between post-colonial feminisms and decolonial feminisms, yet they were read back as South Asian, always already post-colonial, and thus incapable of being decolonializing knowledge practices. Our Bodies, Our Names, and the physical arrangement of the panel, with 3 South Asians on one side and 2 Latin Americans along with the South Asian moderator on the other, contributed to this categorization and separation of scholars by region. In our short presentations, we started autobiographically and moved on to discursively map our arguments. Perhaps it was through that very form that we proved to our critics that we were indeed South Asian post-colonial scholars, incapable of understanding the value of embodied knowledge and unambiguously defined political projects. The 2 decolonial scholars on the panel, Maria Lugones and Brenny Mendoza, embodied Latin America, albeit differently, and repeatedly invoked their alliance to it. During the Q&A, they embraced being from the region and explained how their personal and professional experiences of it made them particularly inclined to decolonial praxis. You know what's interesting? I think I read some paper that was basically maybe by Maria Lugones and Brenny Mendoza. So it was like about the same stuff, but from the other side here. Fun. These overdetermined interpretations of our identities and bodies repeatedly come into play. We give a few other examples to illustrate. In a later panel at NWSA 2016, this time at one related to South Asian caucus, one young scholar berated Ramamurthy for talking about the value of post-colonial feminist scholarship when decolonial feminist activities were struggling over matters of life and death. The problematic assumption here are not only that feminist post-colonial scholars are necessarily South Asian in origin or area of study, but also that such scholars are capable of producing only elite accounts, ones deemed less vital than those that focus on bodies of the precipitous line between life and death. Asher, who was born and raised in India, has been doing research on and in Latin America since the 1980s and on black social movements in Colombia since 1992. Within the context of global geopolitics in the 1990s, black activists often assumed that she had a natural solidarity with black struggles, which she did and continues to do. Over the decades, the shifts in radical racial and cultural politics have led to a different reading of her body and politics among metropolitan black activists and scholars with decolonial leanings. Today, she is automatically associated with post-colonialism. South Asia becomes a metonym for post-colonial feminism, and the body as autobiography stops thinking at its borders. The assumption that the post-colonial approaches have little or no understanding of any but the South Asian context occludes and precludes solidarity with Latin American decolonial politics. Over the past few years, we have repeatedly heard certain simplistic misreadings of post-colonial and decolonial approaches, which are at risk of becoming entrenched. For example, those claiming a decolonial feminist position often posit that the post in post-colonialism and post-colonial feminism refers to after colonialism. Echoing past debates, the post-colonial condition is understood as a temporal anachronism, which does not adequately account for actual existing power geometries today. The critique here goes, how can we be thinking about an after colonialism when we still very much live with colonialism? Furthermore, post-colonial feminism is spatially restricted to areas that were European imperial colonies, but after struggles for independence have achieved sovereignty. Consequently, the salience of ongoing fights for sovereignty and freedom from state violence by indigenous and minoritized communities and the debilitating consequences of white settler racism and racial capitalism are ostensibly insufficiently acknowledged by post-colonial feminist scholarship. From a post-colonial feminist viewpoint, it is presumed that decolonial feminism, in its embrace of alternate forms of knowing and valorization of embodied experience, does not contend with the problematic of representation. Representing the subaltern is both a portrait, a representation of, and proxy, a speaking for. Representation, post-colonial feminists posit, is an aporia impossible to solve, but one we nevertheless need to navigate and to do so ethically. Decolonial feminism, with its commitment to change the world, not just to interpret it, presumes access to a radical alterity as a basis for social movements and struggles. For post-colonial feminists, politics is always messy and without guarantees. Put schematically, post-colonial and decolonial approaches are framed in binary terms. Post-colonial approaches are understood to be deconstructive and academic, whereas decolonial ones are commonly thought to be constructive, political, and solution-oriented. Post-colonial approaches emerge from and are relevant only to Asia, the Middle East, where decolonial approaches are associated with South America and more recently with indigenous scholars of the Americas. Post-colonial suggests that colonialism is over. Decolonial is about grappling with colonialism's continued forms and signals a future. Decolonial feminism is represented as privileging questions of race in white settler colonies. Post-colonial feminism is represented as ignoring this in the longer history of settler colonization, colonialism in Latin America, which enabled the later European imperial colonization of Asia and Africa. Post-colonial feminism is seen as being uncritically grounded in Western philosophy and Eurocentrism, whereas decolonial feminism is based on non-Eurocentric indigenous ideas, practices radically different from Enlightenment and modernity. Decolonial feminism is the possibility of overturning the coloniality of gender, the inseparability of racism, capitalism, and gender oppression in the logic of colonial modernity. Post-colonial feminist scholarship is represented as focusing on migration, diaspora, and hybridity, and on the paradoxical and ambiguous relationship of post-coloniality as a condition to modernity. All right, I got some comments on how this paper has been set up. It's actually quite interesting in terms of their argumentative structure, which I'd like to comment on, see if I can remember to do that. Such binaries do little to explain the complex relationship by which colonial differences endure and bind us. First, post-colonialism has robustly critiqued European systems of knowledge and the epistemic practices that continue to code difference and reproduce power in contemporary relations, from the global to the intimate. Second, simplistic readings that set up post-colonial and decolonial in stark opposition are troubling because they do not account for the political economy of knowledge production. That radical anti-racist and decolonial politics is being produced in the heart of the U.S. Academy must surely make us pause about how our own contradictions and complicities with global geopolitics. Third, activists are often more savvy than academics and scholars about the institutional context of their struggles. They constantly position themselves in relation to the state and other institutions to win legal and policy accommodations while negotiating for broader political gains. In short, much work needs to be done to flesh out how both post-colonial and decolonial feminisms are anti-colonial. Both are also anti-capitalist, but different in their assessment of outsides to capitalism. For example, work under the rubric of decolonial feminist is seen as more hopeful and praxis-driven, whereas that under the sign of post-colonial feminisms is seen to be working through capitalist articulations at this historical juncture. More detailed attention to historical and contemporary global connections within and across regions might offer some interesting ways beyond current impasses. For instance, foregrounding the analytical and intellectual place of areas such as the Caribbean and Africa in these debates would help guard against the tendency for moments of thought and heuristic devices to become territorialized, essentialized, and static. Readers may also want to see how Regina Cochrane brings indigenous, feminist, and negative dialectical critiques of modernity to bear on climate justice debates. Her side note on the pitfalls of identity politics among Bolivian activists has important insights for this discussion. Constructed binaries between postcolonial and decolonial feminisms, however, are not inevitable. Indeed, at a panel entitled Afterlives of Colonialism, Theorizing the Postcolonial and Decolonial, held prior to the 2016 NWSA at the Five College Women's Studies Research Center in South Hadley, Massachusetts, panelists engaged in intense exchange about the parallels, disjunctions, convergences, and divergences between these two different but related modes of thought. Believing that there is much at stake in having more conversations about anti-colonial feminisms, we organized 2 more roundtables in 2017 at the Royal Geographical Society Institute of British Geographers meeting in London, and then at the NWSA in Baltimore. We asked panelists and participants to rethink regions as theoretical sources and reflect on what post and decolonial feminisms have brought to their own scholarship and activism. We drafted a series of questions to facilitate critical dialogues across differences. What are the multiple genealogies of anti-colonial feminist approaches, and how do they appear and disappear in contemporary discussions? What are the political and analytical convergences and divergences between feminist approaches considered post-colonial versus decolonial? How do critiques of representation of indigenous peoples and third world women commonly associated with post-colonial and transnational feminisms appear in decolonial and settler scholarship? How do we engage, challenge, an intersectional analysis of indigeneity, race, sexuality, caste, religion, and gender associated with indigenous, women of color, queer of color, feminisms, and other varied feminisms around the globe? How can our scholarship interrogate, disrupt the stability of the body as autobiography? How can feminist scholarship engage an anti-capitalist critique? How do we conceive of capitalism's insides and outsides? Do we valorize utopian or vernacular imaginaries of leisure, abundance, degrowth, and anti-work? Situated knowledges, embodied practices, radical care, non-violent human, non-human relations. How do our scholarships and activism engage with social and environmental movements? The discussion reasserted the imperative to deepen and historicize our analyses of race and indigeneity over the longue durée and globally, to continue to grapple with knotty questions of representation, to develop a conceptual vocabulary for the contradictory relationship of subalterns to the state, and to develop ethical practices as scholars learning to learn from below. Postcolonial and decolonial feminisms have much to learn from each other. As variants of anti-colonial scholarship, their attention to the specificities of regions, bodies, and more holds the key to disrupting the unequal and hierarchical politics of knowledge production. But for the key to work, we need to remind ourselves that these differences are also colonial constructs, and we must grapple with the double bind of undoing them. Okay, so this is interesting. As far as I was just commenting on the structure of this argument. The authors here, they started from sort of what looked like a panel gone wrong, where they were, and please, anyone out there ask questions about this. This is not my area, but I will try to do my best to explain what I think is going on here. Sort of like a panel gone wrong, where they were all trying to get something done, and it ended up coming off as a seemingly hostile, where there were two sides, and they ended up not working well together as I guess people would hope, or it wasn't as productive as was hoped. And so from this sort of panel here, where things were sort of didn't work the way they wanted to, the authors here are then expanding to show how the problem, that they were butting heads here, really has sort of like historical roots, and then they sort of show in themselves, in their historical sort of works, it became into the sort of this binary, these sort of framed in this sort of binary way, as they said right here. So the approaches, schematically, the postcolonial and decolonial approaches are framed in binary terms, and so they saw themselves as this embodiment of these sort of binary terms, where one group was on one side, the other group was on the other side, and so this sort of led to a complete disconnect. So what happened is you've got this sort of working from a specific instance of where people were trying to work together, and it sort of devolved into this binary, like two groups. And so then what we're doing here, as the argument is, the paper is progressing, I mean, they say such binaries do little to explain everything. So what happens is it oversimplifies everything. So we're getting, so like a problem occurred, and this was shown how the sort of the concepts are oversimplifying and just cause everything to turn into like a binary, useless mess. And then what happened here is then they tracked it back a little bit to different ways of thinking about what's going on, and how to, like, where exactly, like, what are the points at which they have to, like, sort of like reassess, like how you take away the, like, insides and outsides, the different concepts of location that are being used, the different heuristics. So they have to, like, rework their heuristics to really understand what is going on in how they're understanding what their practice is, and because their practice is actually causing them to not work with people that they would like to work with and work together. And so what happens here is then what they do is they sort of if they tweak their heuristics and rethink the regions as theoretical sources. So what they have to do is sort of re-understand how the it's like, yeah, there's some of the background ideas are really tripping them up, and so if they just rethink the heuristics that they were basing some of their theories on, that doesn't really hurt their theories in any way, then all of a sudden they can have all these much more productive questions that everyone will have something to say on. So that's really sort of an interesting structure of an argument here in our paper. So what they've done is they showed that the oversimplification of how they were understanding themselves and the others led to just them butting heads. But then if they just retweak some of, like, their background assumptions, then all of a sudden everything's going to work slightly better. So this is a sort of an impressive little paper here, in starting from what turned into, like, sort of a mess of a conference and doing better. So yeah, and again, this whole area, this is sort of the whole, what they're trying to do a lot of times, is the hierarchical politics of knowledge production. How are these concepts tripping us up and keeping us from understanding what's going on? So this is, in the history, it's showing the exact problem that they're trying to solve. So it's sort of reflexive too. This is why it's an impressive little paper here in how it was structured, and why I want to mention how the rhetoric of this paper is really kind of interesting, because the paper reflects the history and the content of what they're trying to accomplish. Yeah, so that's why they're in a double bind. Well done, authors, as far as this, like, structural sophistication of a short paper. You don't normally see something this reflexively impressive. Yeah. Other than that, do I have anything else to say? Let's see. The fact that they moved from, I mean, for stuff in this area, they do tend to talk about actual occurrences of things that did actually happen in reality, as opposed to the garbage that happens in a lot of the analytic philosophy. It's like, let's take this impossible situation that has never happened and never will happen, and let's discuss philosophy on those. And I hate those things, but, like, at least over here you get something like actual panels and discussing things that happened. Hey, what's up, Aracel? Thanks for stopping by. But yeah. So, I don't know I have a whole much more to say about this, but it's quite a sort of, yeah, I just like I really appreciate their, like, highly sophisticated structure, even though it just looks like it's setting up a history here of what happened, of, like, a conference gone wrong. It's actually a very sophisticated sort of like, as they said in the bottom, a double bind that they're trying to work themselves out of. And so I thought this is a nice paper that does that. Okie dokie. If anyone has anything else they want to say about this, please let me know. But that'll be it for this paper. I'm actually going to come up with some rubrics, so I will have a more at the end of my little papers, I'll have something to say. So like this one will score like top marks on rhetorical sophistication. It's a very impressively rhetorically sophisticated paper. I think they did a good job also in terms of like this these blocks here. So like how they structured this to give a nice flavor to the new way of new questions that they want to be able to answer and ask and answer. So that's what this will hold. I mean, unfortunately, and I'll score myself very low here on my understanding of the topics. So it's like I can only talk about certain things, but even in this area, it's kind of interesting in how they work through their problems. So that's sort of what I'm going to work on in the future. But okay, that will be it for this paper. And that's it for now.